Hi, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the best performances of the Brahms first Serenade, not the symphony. We'll get to that at some point, but the Serenade. You know, the Brahms Serenades are so beautiful, and they don't get played that often. I mean, it's just a tragedy. They're gorgeous, probably because in the first Serenade anyway, the slow movement's very long, and that can drag, I admit. And in the second serenade, there are no violins, so it's kind of an odd orchestral ensemble. But they have a charm all of their own. The music is so sunny and warm and lovely. And these are the pieces in which Brahms learned what to do with the woodwind section. So they have lots of really lovely writing for the winds. When you compare them to the symphonies, you'll find something really very, very interesting, which is that Brahms had a real conception of symphonic orchestration. It's said that Brahms symphonies are not well scored, some of them, or some parts of them, and I sort of actually agree with that. Sometimes they have their thick, cloggy passages, but the reason is because Brahms felt that the symphony had to be a work for the full orchestra. Not necessarily the full orchestra all the time, but for the full orchestra or suite of instruments being used at any one time in any one movement. That's why, for example, in the symphonies, they almost invariably, a movement will end with all of the instruments that play in that movement, even if it's a quiet ending. We'll almost always have a final chord where everyone gets to play. There's a sense he had that symphonies were compositions for the full orchestra, and no note or instrument could go to waste. Everything had to have a purpose and a use. That's why also I think that with the symphonies, with the exception of the second, they all begin with a tune for the strings, for example. It's really very, very interesting. But when you listen to the serenade, you find, he doesn't care so much. He's a lot more relaxed. The first serenade begins with a wonderful horn solo. He would never have done that in a symphony. That horn solo, incidentally, is audibly based on the finale of Haydn's Symphony No. 104, the London Symphony. The tune, anyway, is quite similar. So because these serenades are, at least as far as Brahms goes, comparatively lesser known, they've been recorded much less frequently. And I also think they've been recorded quite a bit more successfully as a group because only people who really care about them and love them bother to do it. They don't feel obliged to do them the way conductors feel absolutely positively obligated to do Brahms symphonies. So I want to talk about 7 recordings of the Brahms first serenade, which has 6 movements. It's quite a substantial work, 45, 50 minutes. It's pretty long and really just delicious. I mean, really, really lovely. Like I said, the slow movement can hang fire, but if you think it's dull, you can just skip it and listen to all the rest of it. It doesn't make any difference. That's the nice thing about it being a serenade. You have options, and you don't have to be obligated to sit through the bits you may not like. So first I want to talk about 2 performances that I don't have with me here. They're over in storage, but they are beautiful performances, and I love them very much. It's just that, when you live in an apartment in Brooklyn, you have to pick and choose a little bit what you're going to store. And thanks to COVID, I'm not in the suburbs where I can access all of the other ones. So take my word for it. The first is Istvan Kertész with the London Symphony. 2 beautiful performances. He did both of them, but the first serenade is absolutely lovely. Very similar in character to his Dvorak cycle. He did do a Brahms cycle too, Kertész, but he did that in Vienna, which was an entirely different kettle of fish. But the serenades are fresh and lively and charming and delightful and definitely worth hearing. The other one also comes out of London, and it may come as a surprise to you. That's Sir Adrian Boult. Sir Adrian, the planets guy. He didn't do a lot of non-British repertoire on disc. He did make a Brahms cycle. I think it's kind of boring, frankly, with the London Philharmonic on EMI, which is now Warner. I found the Brahms symphonies to be somewhat slack and the orchestra not terribly well disciplined, and it's kind of, not special. But he also did the first Serenade, and it's a shocker. It's wonderful, taut, lively, fresh, vital, definitely worth hearing. I mean, it's really very surprisingly lovely. But now I'm going to talk about the 5 recordings that I have sitting beside me, which are, I think, my favorite ones of all the various versions. And they do have, like I said, quite a few recordings, but the quality of them is higher on the whole than it is with the symphonies. Maybe because the music is easier. That's a possibility too. First, Jerry Schwartz with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. Now, this, I don't even know if it's still around. I mean, God knows, it was on Non-Such originally. This is a real chamber performance of a chamber work. Originally, some of you may know, it was a chamber work. In fact, a nonet version of it has been recorded. It's on the Praga label, and it's quite lovely that way. But this is a really fresh, lean, totally transparent performance. And Schwartz actually was a very good Brahms conductor. You know, he did a Brahms cycle that's in the big Naxos Schwartz box, which is also well worth hearing. He knew how to do Brahms, and this performance of the Serenade came out when there were really, I mean, no one was paying attention to the Serenade, and it was a wonderful, refreshing take on a work that was getting very little attention. And I really would recommend highly that chamber orchestras all over do it, because the orchestration, for all that it uses trumpets and drums, is otherwise pretty sensible. There are no trombones. It's well within the capacity of most chamber orchestras to do, and they should do it more frequently because it's a wonderful second half work all by itself. Next, a terrific performance, Jiří Bělohlavek with the Czech Philharmonic. Now, you know the Czech Philharmonic. They are great for anything that requires woodwinds. And this is a woodwind piece. All of the emphasis in color is on the woodwind section. And they play so wonderfully. Just the sound of the clarinet, you know, when it plays the opening theme with the I can't do that. I'm not going to embarrass myself. But the point is, it sounds great. There's a creaking chair at the beginning of this somewhere that's kind of irritating. But aside from the creaking chair in the first movement exposition, it's an absolutely wonderful performance. Also wonderful about the Czech Phil is these nice piercing trumpets that cut through the texture without blasting. It's a wonderful thing to have when you're doing these pieces, because the trumpets give you, first of all, they have rhythm, but remarkably for Brahms, at the first climax in the first movement, the trumpets get the tune. You know, they actually go ya da 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 ba 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 da 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 da. You know, I mean, something else you would never have done in a symphony is give the trumpets the tune like that, and they blaze out. That's what you want to hear. You know, there's an otherwise very nice recording that was reissued by Pentatone with Court Mazur in the Gewandhaus that I would have liked, except for the fact that at that first climax, the trumpets just vanish. They might as well not even be there. I don't know what was going on, but it's just, it ruins it for me. It may not for you. Now, some period instrument groups have done these things, and I haven't heard any that are particularly good, but if you want a sort of period instrument style with none of the period instrument problems, like horrifying strings and, you know, screechy this or sour that, you do Charles Mackerras. Charles Mackerras with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Beautiful performance. I mean, performances, you know, Mackerras never made a bad record, ever in his life. He was one of the great conductors of the 20th century. He never had a regular affiliation with a major label or a major orchestra, because I think, frankly, he just loved music too much. I mean, he was a wonderful, wonderful man. I knew him pretty well, and you know, I could give you some Charles Mackerras stories, which I will, you know, along in the course of doing these talks. But his Brahms symphonies were among the first to try and adopt what was called the Meiningen manner, which was, you know, the performance techniques of the Meiningen Court Orchestra, which premiered some of the Brahms symphonies and which supposedly had a much freer sort of interpretive approach. And as part of that series, as an adjunct to it, he made these. And this is as beautiful a disc of the Serenades as you're going to hear. Just terrific. Next, we have a couple of complete cycles that also did the serenades. And the first is Claudio Abbado. He made the first serenade with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. You know, Abbado's Brahms in Berlin was the best thing he ever did in Berlin. It was probably one of the best things he ever did anywhere. You know, because he was such a micromanager and such a podium fuss budget half the time, he could ruin anything that was more complicated. But Brahms was sort of made for him because Brahms himself was a micromanager, wasn't he? You know, he was a very controlling, sort of obsessive guy when it came to his symphonic ambitions. And in Abbado, he found a really, really congenial interpreter. And so these performances of the serenades are well worth hearing as well, as are all of Abbado's Brahms symphonies and Brahms performances generally. They're just terrific. However, we come to the last, and to my mind the best, for me in any case, Bernhard Haitink with the Concertgebouw. Now, Haitink's Brahms cycle doesn't thrill me as much. I find it to be a little bit on the dour, plain, and uninteresting side, to be honest with you. I really do. But in the serenades, again, maybe because of the basis in the woodwind section, which was a Concertgebouw specialty, or maybe it was just because Haitink always seemed to wake up and do his very best when dealing with orphan works, you know, works that don't get the attention they deserve, works where he could really act as an advocate and push them. And it doesn't matter what they were. It could be like Shostakovich's 12th or the Manfred Symphony by Tchaikovsky. You know, he would take something that you'd think would be hopeless and simply give it a class, a sense of it's really better than we ever thought it could be sound to it. Now, of course, the Brahms serenades don't need that. They don't need special pleading in that particular sense. But they do need somebody who's willing to give a certain amount of extra conviction and gumption to the performance. And these performances here, they have it. They really have it. Unfortunately, you're stuck with all of, you know, the other symphonies, although the concertos are quite good. You get, the piano concertos with, I think it's Claudio Abbado here, and the violin concerto with Henrik Schering, and the double concerto with Schering and Starker. I mean, you could do worse than that. Those are beautiful performances of the concertos. The symphonies aren't terrible. They're never terrible, you know, with this group and these people. They're always musical. But if you can find that disc that had the first serenade, there's a separate disc on Philips, grab it. Just grab it. It was beautiful. There's a warmth and lyricism and color, and it all just flows effortlessly and organically in the way you kind of want. It's relaxed, as a serenade should be, but also rhythmic and impulsive and always fluent. And that is how I think the Brahms serenade should sound. So my recommendation is Bernhard Haitink with the Amsterdam Concertgebouw Orchestra. But any of these 7 versions will do you proud in the Brahms First Serenade, a work that deserves a lot more respect than it normally gets. Thank you so much for listening to this little talk, and keep on listening, folks.